Good afternoon, Year 4. Welcome to your fourth geography lesson now. This week we're going to be doing a case study. So we're going to be really examining an earthquake which happened in Christchurch in New Zealand in February 2011. So let's jump into the learning. So our key question today is, what impact did the earthquake in Christchurch have? Let's begin with always as our knowledge quiz. Please number 1 to 5 on your page. Pause me and come back when you've completed that. Welcome back. So question number 1. The physical effects of earthquakes impact either the natural environment, buildings and roads, man-made features, or all of the above. Pause me now. Well done. The physical effects of earthquakes impact the natural environment. So buildings and roads and man-made features would be human effects of earthquakes. Question 2, as a transform plate boundary, two tectonic plates pull apart from each other, slide past each other in opposite directions, move towards each other, or do not touch. Pause me now. Welcome back. Well done if you said they slide past each other in opposite directions. So pulling apart is divergent, moving towards each other is convergent, and at a plate boundary, that is where plates do touch. Question 3, damaged houses are a physical effect of an earthquake, true or false? Pause me now. Yes, well done if you said that is false. Damaged houses are a human effect of earthquakes because they are man-made. Question 4 from our Roman unit. Before the Romans invaded, the Celts lived in something houses with something roofs. What are my two blanks? Pause me now and try and fill in the blanks. Welcome back. Well done if you said that it was round houses with thatched roofs. In question 5 from last year's unit, a mountain's altitude is either where the forest zone on a mountain is located, the width of a mountain, what time of climate the mountain has, or the height of a mountain measured above sea level. Pause me now. So well done if you said it is the height of a mountain measured above sea level. Okay, let's move on to today's learning. First of all, thinking about our last two lessons, I would like you in your head to think of one physical effect and one human effect of an earthquake. So just in your head, think of one human and one physical effect of an earthquake. Pause me now and do this. Well done. So you could have had any of the following. So just to recap, our physical effects we've looked at are aftershocks, avalanches, landslides, fires and tsunamis. And the human effects we've looked at are damaged buildings, homes, roads and railroads, loss of life, lack of food and water, and that disease is spread more easily. So if you had any of these, well done. So moving on to look at the Christchurch earthquake. Here are some pictures from some of the damage that the earthquake brought to the city. Look at the key facts first of all for our case study. A 6.3 magnitude, so earthquake magnitude is a measure of the size of the waves generated by an earthquake, so it's how scientists measure earthquakes, and we're going to look at this properly next lesson. A 6.3 magnitude earthquake occurred on the 22nd of February 2011 in Christchurch, New Zealand. Lasting less than 10 seconds, the quake killed 185 people and created massive destruction in the city. So earthquakes do usually only last a short time, and this particular one only lasted 10 seconds, yet it was destructive enough to kill 185 people. So here is a map of the world. New Zealand is located right down here, next to this bigger country, which is Australia. And here in New Zealand is Christchurch. So Christchurch is one of the biggest cities in New Zealand. So why did the earthquake happen in New Zealand? So New Zealand lies on the plate boundary of the Australian and Pacific tectonic tectonic plates. The alpine fault that you can see here is a bit of transformed plate boundary, and it's called alpine because this is where earthquakes have managed to create some mountains. So the reason that New Zealand receives a lot of earthquakes is because it lies on the plate boundary of the Australian and Pacific tectonic plates. So the black line on this diagram and the red line on this diagram shows us where that plate boundary is. So the earthquake occurred because the two plates slid past each other, one got stuck, pressure built up, and that pressure was released as a wave of energy called a tremor. That is going back to our knowledge that we learned in our second lesson on what causes an earthquake. So although it wasn't the biggest earthquake to hit New Zealand, it managed to cause more damage than most because it was so close to a city. It also struck really close to the Earth's surface. Now, I would like you to number 1 and 2 on your page. We are just going to do a quick knowledge recap. So my first question for you is, what magnitude was the earthquake in Christchurch? And question 2 is, why does New Zealand get a lot of earthquakes? Pause me now and answer these 2 questions. Okay, welcome back. So from our key information on the case study, we learned that the magnitude of the earthquake in Christchurch was 6.3 on the Richter scale, which we will learn about next lesson. But for now, you just need to know that the earthquake in Christchurch was 6.3. And why does New Zealand get a lot of earthquakes? Well, New Zealand has a lot of earthquakes because it is on the plate boundary of the Pacific and the Australian tectonic plates. Well done if you got those correct. So why was the earthquake so devastating? Let's have a look at the physical effects that the earthquake caused. First one is aftershocks. So scientists believe that this earthquake was actually an aftershock itself from the September 2010 7.1 magnitude earthquake near Darfield. However, since it was a 6.3 magnitude earthquake, it had its own aftershocks. So this earthquake that we're learning about caused its own aftershocks, but scientists believe it was actually an aftershock itself, because there was a bigger earthquake in 2010. But as we can see on this diagram here, in June 2011 there was a 6.4 aftershock, and in December 2011 there was a 6 aftershock. So aftershocks are the first physical effect that occurred due to this earthquake. The next one is landslides. So the earthquake triggered many landslides to the east of the city. So we have some pictures here of a landslide. So we can see in this first one, a big boulder of land has rolled down. And we can see how it's actually bent this house here. And in this one, we can see how much mud and dust and rubble has fallen onto this house. So the second physical effect of this earthquake were landslides. And the third physical effect were fires. So there weren't actually many fires caused by this earthquake, but one did break out when the CTV building collapsed. And as we will learn when we look at the human effects, the collapse of the CTV building was perhaps the most devastating effects of this earthquake. So the 3 physical effects of this earthquake were aftershocks, landslides, and fires. Let's now turn our attention to the human effects of the Christchurch earthquake. So the first one was the loss of life. The earthquake struck during lunchtime, which meant many people were in the streets. 149 people died from being hit when buildings collapsed in the city centre, and this includes the CTV building that I just told you about. In total, 185 people died. So unfortunately, there was a loss of life in this earthquake, and that was mostly due to them being hit when buildings collapsed. The second human effect were injuries. So over 2,000 people were injured during the earthquake, and this obviously put a lot of pressure on hospitals because that was 2,000 extra people that they would not have usually received that day. So people had to be taken to hospitals all over New Zealand to receive treatment. So the second human effect was injuries. The next human effect was diseases and lack of food and water. So 80% of the water and the sewage system was severely damaged, which contaminated the water supply. more people were crammed together in temporary accommodations. As we can see in this picture, a lot of these people's homes were destroyed. Therefore, they had nowhere to sleep, so they were put into very, very quickly built temporary accommodation, given just the basics, such as bedding. And obviously, if a lot of people are crammed into a small space, as we've learned a lot recently, diseases do spread faster. And in the city, a massive percentage of the water supply was damaged, which led to water supply becoming contaminated. And as we've spoken about before, due to all the rubble on the roads, food supplies will not have been easily available. The next human effect is damaged buildings. So many important and historic buildings were damaged, including the Provincial Council chambers and the Pine Gould Corporation buildings. Over half of the city's buildings were damaged. So as you can imagine, in a city, even one or two buildings to collapse would be a massive challenge to deal with, but over half of the buildings in the city were damaged. And of course, homes were also damaged. Over 16,000 homes were severely damaged, and many had to be demolished as they were completely irreparable. So as you can see, this man standing outside his house, there's no way that anybody could save that house or try and rebuild it. It would just have to be levelled off the ground and rebuilt. But obviously that causes a really long-term issue, is that houses can't be rebuilt very quickly, and you'd have had to clear all that rubble away first, so there would have been a lot to deal with. It would have taken a long time, and people had to live in temporary accommodation. So let's just recap our human effects. We had loss of life, injuries, diseases and lack of food and water, damaged buildings, and damaged homes. Okay, we are now going to move on to our second activity. We're going to create a Diamond 9. So answering this question, which is the most important to deal with first, we're going to organise our physical and our human effects. So at the top, we are going to have our most important effect to deal with. And at the bottom, we're going to have our least important effect to deal with. So I'm just going to flick to my camera so I can model this for you. So I'm just going to begin by having a think about what order I'm going to put my effects in. So actually I've already decided that our list numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've already decided for number 9 I'm going to put aftershocks, because unfortunately that's not really a problem that we can deal with. The Earth will do its own thing, and unfortunately we therefore can't really deal with that. Okay, so I've got my other facts. Well, again, landslides, we obviously need to clear the rubble. So that one is going to be quite important. Fires obviously need to be dealt with as quickly as possible, so that one's definitely going to be near the top for me. Got loss of life, injuries, diseases, lack of food and water, and damaged buildings and houses. Okay, I think for number 1, I'm going to go with fires, because they need to be dealt with extremely quickly. Next, I'm going to go with lack of food and water, because they are human essentials, and it's really important to make sure that humans can get a clean water supply. Next, I am going to go for injuries, because again, it's really important that when people are hurt, they get immediate medical attention so that they don't become more ill. Next, I'm going to go with diseases, because again, it's really important that we treat people with diseases and that we also prevent the spread of disease. My next one that I'm going to go for is damaged houses, because I don't want people to have to stay in temporary accommodation longer than they have to, because that leads to many things such as the spread of diseases, and it doesn't help with the problem of lack of food and water. So I have left damaged buildings, loss of life, and landslides. Now I'm actually going to put loss of life as number 8, because again, there's not much I can do to deal with it. Sadly, it was just an effect that happened during the earthquake, and therefore there's not really much that we can do about it. So other than that, I just have damaged buildings and landslides. So I'm going to go damaged buildings for number 6. And landslides for number 7. Because again, landslides, I can't stop them from happening, but I could tidy up from them. So it is going to be an important effect to deal with, but it's not something that I feel needs dealing with straight away. Okay, so my first bit's done. I've just made a nice list, so it's very visible to me of the order that I'm going to put my things in. And I've talked through and I've reasoned why I'm putting them in that order, so I'm feeling happy about that order. Okay, my next thing is that I'm now going to put them into the diamond shape. So before I draw anything, which might not fit my words in, I'm actually going to write my words first. I'm going to do it as neatly as I can in a diamond shape. So fires, I have said I'm putting at the top. On my next line, as we can see on this diagram on my slide, we need the next 2 most important things. So mine were lack of food and water, and injuries. Okay, so that's 1, 2, and 3 on my page. I now need my next 3 important things. So that's going to be my number 4, 5, and 6. So I'm spreading it out a little bit further. Diseases, damaged houses, and damaged buildings. It's 4, 5, and 6. Looking at my diagram, I then need to do 7 and 8 as a 2 again. So going to line up roughly with number 2 and 3. So landslides and loss of life. And number 9 is aftershocks. Okay, so I've got my diamond now, and it actually does look like quite a diamond shape. Now, to make it a little bit neater, more presentable, I'm just going to draw boxes around my ideas. Now, what I'd really love again is if when you post a seesaw, you can do a voice note, because whilst I was doing mine for you, I tried to explain to you why I was putting things in the particular order. But just from this diagram, you can't see my thinking. So it'd be really lovely for your teachers if you could explain to us why you've put things in this order. And there's no right or wrong answers. That's the great thing. It's just what you think is the most important and the least important to deal with quickly. So as I said, I would do your writing first, so you know that it's definitely going to fit into your boxes. And then leave enough room to make sure you can draw your diamond. But there we have it, my very own diamond 9, answering my question of which is the most important effect to deal with first. Okay, so now I've modelled that, I would love you to pause me and go away and do your very own diamond 9, and I'm looking forward to seeing them on Seesaw, hopefully with an explanation. Pause me now. And welcome back. Let's look at our final section of the lesson. So let's have a look at the rescue and restoration efforts during the 2011 earthquake. So here we have a picture of 2 men who celebrated after they were pulled out from the rubble. So even though it's very tragic that 185 people lost their lives, there are also lots of survival stories, and there's always hope. So these men, they were buried under the rubble and they were pulled from it. So rescue teams from 7 different countries arrived to help dig out survivors, and this did include the UK. So the UK flew their own rescue team to help dig out survivors. Around £5 million was sent from around the world to help, and aid workers from the Red Cross also came to help. So we had a look at the Red Cross last week, and they came to help support people who had lost their houses and try and provide clean food and water. So here we have a picture of an Australian rescue worker, and down here we actually have a team of Japanese rescue workers. So lots of aid was sent to New Zealand. New Zealand has its own rescue team as well, called the Farmy Army. So the Farmy Army was made up of 800 farmers who brought their farm machines and muscle to help clean out the city. So obviously it would have been hard to transport a lot of big machines to help clear the rubble, and therefore people who had machines in New Zealand, such as the farmers and the Farmy Army, they lent their machine, they drove it down, and they helped clear the rubble with all their machinery. However, lots of temporary housing did have to be built. So as I said earlier, 16,000 people lost their homes. So villages were set up by the government by shifting portable homes onto council-owned land. These villages didn't all close until 2018, so 7 years after the earthquake. So imagine you've been living in your lovely family home, and sadly there's an earthquake and you end up in a smaller house, perhaps, in a kind of quite cramped village like this. It would be really quite a challenge, but the government did provide temporary housing. And as we said last week, rebuilding houses is very much a long-term project. The destruction of houses is a long-term effect. And this really shows how that is the case. It took 7 years to get some people back into a proper house. So by August, so 6 months after the earthquake in 2011, all water and sewage was restored for residents. Now that might seem now quite quick compared to the 7 years waiting for a house, but imagine for 6 months if you didn't have a water supply in your house and you had to go and collect it from elsewhere. It's still a massive issue to deal with. And also in August, roads and houses were cleared of debris, again just showing quite how long it takes to sort things out. And here's a picture of a road that collapsed during the earthquake. So the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority was created, which was the organisation which was going to rebuild the area, and it had special powers to change planning laws and regulations. So as soon as the earthquake happened, Christchurch was divided into 4 zones. So we had the red zone. The red zone were areas which were very unstable, building on it would not be safe and it would be difficult. And at first people were not allowed into the red zone. So until June 2013, parts of the red zone actually remained. And here we are, soldiers patrolling the red zone because it was so dangerous for people, they couldn't allow people to go into the red zone. The next level up was the white zone, which was the area that had not been checked at all yet. So it was again an area which it wasn't really able to be built on yet. The orange zone was where more checks were needed before the land could be built on. And the green zone was land which wasn't damaged and could be built on again. So as soon as land could pass into the green zone, that was what people wanted, as then a bigger rebuilding programme could begin. So for the rebuilding and restoration effort, we had aid sent by lots of different countries, including money and people to help. We had the Farmy Army, a group of farmers who brought their machines and muscle to help. We had temporary housing built by the government. Sewage and water were provided by August, and roads and houses were cleared of debris, and a big rebuilding project was undertaken. So for your final bit, I would like you to have a think about what would be the hardest challenge to sort out after the earthquake. So you might be thinking along the lines of the hardest challenge would be to sort out rebuilding houses, because rebuilding houses takes a really long time, and it means that people have to be in temporary accommodation for a long time. I'd like you to try and link it to this earthquake. So again, for example, I'd say that rebuilding houses was really difficult because there was a lot of there was a lot of land, especially in the red and white zones, which were not being able to be built on for a very long time, which meant that people had to live in temporary accommodation for around 7 years. So have a think specifically about this earthquake in Christchurch. What do you think would have been the hardest challenge to sort out for the people after the earthquake? So pause me now and answer this question in your notebook, please. Thank you for today, Year 4. I've really enjoyed this lesson and I hope you've learned lots about the earthquake in Christchurch. I'm excited to see your activities on Seesaw, and hopefully with your Diamond 9 hear a voice note explaining why you have put the effects in that order. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.